What's email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me today on The Conversation is Emmanuel Caprais. Emmanuel is the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of ITT Inc., an engineering solutions company. Before joining ITT in 2012, Emmanuel held leadership positions at both Morelli and Vallejo and earned his graduate degree in business in France and his MBA from the Columbia Business School in New York. As a leader, Emmanuel is focused on driving sustainable value creation and delivering quality financial performance for his organization. Emmanuel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Clint. I'm happy to be here.
So I like to think of the guests that come on as kind of superheroes, and we know every superhero has a backstory. You have multiple degrees, you speak 4 languages, you've worked for several or many great companies where you've held a wide variety of important leadership positions. And so how did you get to where you are today? How did all that happen? What's your path look like?
So regarding the different languages, I'm French, so I had to learn different languages because outside of Europe, some places in Africa and Quebec, nobody speaks French. So it was kind of an important thing for me to do. My family being fairly international, we have Spanish, Czech Republic heritage, but also my parents had an expat experience in the U.S. While I was in college. So I think you could say that I'm pretty predisposed to living in international settings. And I think if I step back and I think about my path, I think it was at the time it was individual choices that then I really tried to mold into an overall vision for my life. As a person, I'm pretty adventurous. I'm comfortable with the unknown. And so, I started my career in Mexico, and I did that instead of going through the military service in France. And that really gave me an opportunity to see something completely different. From then, I went on to live in the US. I spent 7 years in Cincinnati working for the same company. My experience in Mexico had been pretty successful. And then, so once I was out of France, I realized that it would be very unlikely for me to come back anytime soon. And then I moved on. After the US, I went to Italy, and I kept on climbing the corporate ladder. And so after a while, I thought that my time with this company, Vallejo, had come to an end, and I decided to move on. I moved to Germany. I went back to Italy with another company, and then in 2014, I joined ITT. And I held various leadership roles in ITT until I became CFO in 2020.
Okay. Wow. You just mentioned some of the countries I've been to most recently, actually. I was in June. I was in Paris planning the 2024 Summer Games for Coca-Cola. And then I just got back last week from 3 weeks in Germany planning the Euro UEFA for Coca-Cola. And then in March, I'll be going to Milan to plan the Winter Olympics. So 3 countries right off the bat. And of course, I live in the U.S. I'm with you step for step. I miss Mexico. I got to go hit that one. But So as I mentioned in the intro, your bio says that you're, quote, focused on driving sustainable value creation, end quote. And I read where someone said of you that you know how to, quote, focus on the most value creating options, end quote. So how do you go about spotting and magnifying the most efficient value creating opportunities within a team or an organization?
Yeah, so over time, you get to understand what drives performance in the business setting and what drives success. The basic is to keep your people safe while they make quality products that you can deliver on time in the eyes of the customer. And here, I want to stress this: the customer is the judge of your performance. You obviously try to improve internally and drive performance internally, but when it comes to business success, it's the customer that should judge your performance. And so once you're able to do that, to keep your people safe, to deliver quality products on time, which is the SQDC framework, safety, quality, delivery, and cost, then you know that a large chunk of your job is done. And this is especially true in an an industrial setting. Obviously, that applies to a lot of the businesses, but this is how you can best differentiate. So focus is super important. Having your eyes on the prize is what makes the difference, I think, between management teams. And so that leads to repeating the same things over and over, because in a business environment and when you deal with teams, there are many opportunities for you and your team to get distracted. And so, because it's such a dynamic environment, so you got to be always focused on the prize. And then after that, once you set the plans, it's controlling that the agreed upon plans are executed, and that you're ready to pivot if circumstances change. And this is a really important point, because a plan is great, but implementing a plan as you design it at the beginning is very unlikely. So you got to be flexible enough to be able to adapt to changing circumstances.
I think you just hit on one of the biggest fallacies, because project management is my background. And that's one of the things I often hear is, well, the plan changed. Something was wrong. I'm like, no, the plan wasn't wrong. It's just you're being asked, 18, 24, 36 months in advance to lay out a plan of how you're going to get there. Something will be different. And that's just reality. So I like the fact that you recognize that. And, for project work, you have to be flexible, right? Yep. Make sure that you can adjust for whatever life hits you with, whether it's a key resource who's out or maybe the business dynamic changed. And sometimes killing a project is probably the best thing to do, and not taking it all the way to fruition and have no customer in the end. So.
And I would say, Clint, it doesn't mean that your priority or your goal changes. It just means that you got to be flexible in terms of how you get to your goal.
For sure. I liken it to climbing Kilimanjaro or any other mountain. You obviously have a plan for how you're going to make your ascent and your descent, because you want to survive, but it doesn't mean that your plan will go perfectly as you set it out. There'll be some trail you were going to take that's washed out, and you got to make a different approach. Your goal to getting to the top doesn't change. It's just the route you take to get there has to adjust.
That's right.
So it's one thing to have this business knowledge that you clearly do and be good with numbers, but it's an entirely different thing altogether to be able to successfully manage and lead people. And I got to tell you, for me personally, in my world, I'm always talking about process and people. You need both to be successful. And I think the people side, frankly, is much harder. Excel can help me with process, maybe Microsoft Project, but probably not the people side of things. So how and when did you begin to develop your people management skills? And what advice do you have for those listening who may want to become better in that area?
Sure. So, you cannot invent yourself as a leader of people or as a manager of people. And for me, what was really important is to be able to copy what I saw what worked, and avoid making the mistakes that others made and that didn't work. And it was key for me to be an effective leader and an effective manager. And so I think that what's really important, my advice to a lot of people would be like, nobody should be ashamed to copy something that works. Obviously, not copying it. I'm not talking about exactly copying, but also making it yours, making it in line with your values, in line with your expectations, in line with the way you want to conduct yourself as a business leader and as a person in general. And I would say there were some keys to success for me. First was to communicate clearly a vision. So people need to be inspired. They need to believe in a project. And then so you have, as the leader, as the manager, you have to provide that project. A vision and also clear expectations. And I think it's key for the team and for yourself, because it's unfair to expect performance out of a team if you're not clear in terms of your expectations. And so clarifying what you expect out of them, and how also they need to deliver, and what is going to be your role as a leader of that team. The second point in my mind is to be a supporter, to be an enabler of the individual components of the team. And this is key to be successful, and this is key to a leader's credibility and effectiveness. Your people need to know that if there's an obstacle in their path, you're going to be able to help them clear it. It doesn't mean that you do their job, because accountability is super important for a team. And so your people need to feel accountable. But I think as a leader, you need to serve your people. And so serving your people is detecting also when something is not going right, when they need your help. And you as a leader should be able to clear the path for them, remove all the distractions, all the obstacles that don't allow your team to do their job. So putting yourself at the service of the people is key. And then I would say asking questions for me has been one of the best advice I received. And I received an advice saying, a person told me, you need to ask why. You need to always understand what's happening. And I cannot tell you how many times I avoided embarrassment because I chose not to challenge, not to criticize, but to ask why. And not only ask why, but also listen then for the answer. And listen effectively. And I have to say, Clint, I'm not a patient person, and so listening for me has been really difficult because it's all about patience. But I think that it was very important for me to be an effective manager, trying to understand what people mean and don't assume that I know what they mean, and then helping them through logic, because as a leader you cannot know everything, but through logical thinking, helping them to find the best solution. And so as you can tell, there was a lot of personal behavioral change that was needed for me to become the leader that I am today. If you look at me maybe 10 years ago, I really wasn't patient. I wasn't a good listener. I was certainly never asking why. And so that's a lot of work that I did on myself. And sometimes I still catch myself not asking why. I don't think I ask why enough, but I think that has been key for me to become a more effective leader.
I really appreciate that open honesty. I will tell you though that reading through the recommendations on your LinkedIn profile, I think people saw something maybe in you that was already great even 10 years ago. So let me just go through a couple of these that I read, because I think they're just phenomenal traits for a leader to have. And these I just pull right out of your recommendations on LinkedIn. But he has good planning and clear communication capabilities. He's always interested in different points of view to balance and challenge his own. Demonstrated leadership by confronting challenges head on with honesty and transparency, which are two words that I think are super important. His ability to explain and coach me with certain strategies helped bring me to another level. He's extremely good at managing win-win relationships with all employees. His influence was key in my learning and development, and then one of the most challenging, successful, and supportive team players I've ever met. So, these are just super, super impressive to me personally. And such amazing feedback from the people that you've worked with in the past, who are closest to you, who can see these things. And this was going to be a question, how did you develop these traits? But it sounds like you did it through self-reflection, realizing that you had some places, some gaps you needed to fill in. You weren't just born with them, because you said patience is something that you maybe don't have a lot of. And yet you recognize that, and you worked really super hard to make sure you ask the question why. And again, to me, it's really important is in communication is listening, right? I often say you have two ears and one mouth, and you should use them in that proportion. And that's difficult sometimes because we know the answer. We just want to get you there as quickly as we can and move on to the next obstacle to face. So I applaud you for taking that time to do that. Now, a few months ago, you commented that cash flow is rebounding as supply chains stabilize. Obviously, the past few years caused quite a disruption to major supply chains across many industries, not just yours. Can you talk about the disruptions you saw, the problems that caused your organization, and then how you and your team worked together to overcome those obstacles?
So entering into the after COVID, so the COVID rebound situation, we faced longer lead times from suppliers. And even with those longer lead times, our suppliers had difficulties meeting the delivery dates. And so we were faced with an extremely difficult situation. In addition to this, we had internal issues where we lost a lot of people and a lot of very competent people in areas such as machining. And so those people who have 15, 20 years of experience, you don't replace them the next day. And so we had to face significant issues externally, a really tight labor market, and some departure from key personnel. And so the focus has been to say, okay, so we can't really control, or there's only so much that we can do with our suppliers. They have the same problems in terms of labor availability, and so we got to focus on what we can do internally. And so in one of our businesses, we were able to offset the increase in lead times, the deterioration in terms of on-time delivery from our suppliers, by shortening our internal lead times. And the way we did this was really going back to the most basic lean principles, which is you follow your product and you try to understand where your product stops. And whenever it stops, you got to find a way to move it through as quickly as possible. And so if you think about it, we had our lead times from our suppliers that increased, that probably doubled. And so in some cases, we had lead times that were 6 to 9 months. And so we really had to compress internally our lead times in terms of assembly, in terms of manufacturing, in order to try to offset some of those increased external challenges that we were facing. And so we deployed in a lot of our different factories. We deployed that methodology where we really looked at where are the constraints, where are the bottlenecks, what can we do to make sure that the products flow through our factories in the most effective way, so we have a chance to be able to offset some of those increased lead time. And I have to say, it worked well for us. We were able to convert more quickly internally, absorb some of that increased lead time from suppliers, and then ship that to customers. Customers really appreciated this because we had shorter lead times than the competition, and as a result, we were able to grab market share and convert these sales into cash, and as a result, boost our cash performance.
And then when the supplier lead times do go back to normal, you're still going to be even that much quicker to market.
That is right. Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
As a CFO, part of your job is resource allocation, deciding who gets what and when they get it. This requires being able to make some difficult decisions, and I'm assuming prioritizing things, and time to time delivering tough news. Can you talk about your decision-making process in those tough moments, as well as strategies for communicating messages that the other party may not want to hear?
Sure. So one of the great things about ITT is that we have a super strong balance sheet and a super strong cash performance. So we are, I would say, less impacted, like other companies, by a burden of a debt or debt repayment that we would have to make. It doesn't mean that we deploy cash with less discipline, but it means that there's one less pressure that is onto us. I think that when we look at how to allocate capital and how to make those decisions, for us, what's really important is to have a clear understanding of the business case. And in ITT, the key of the key performance drivers for the team is to know what they're talking about, to know the business environment, what drives the market, how we win in those markets. And so if the team is able to really explain and convince us that an investment is needed in order to win in the market, then I would say we're more than happy to fund that project. We have to make sure that we execute. And so once the project is approved, we're very disciplined about making sure that we get the goals that we were looking for. So I would say the number one prioritization criteria is how well you're able to explain the project and convince the management team that the returns that you're showing are actually going to be executed. And I would say that our teams are pretty diligent and pretty precise in that case. And they're also very responsible. So they know that even if we're in a favorable position from a cash standpoint, this is not an excuse to spend left and right. So I would say, because we have this understanding between, let's say, the leadership of the company and the business teams, prioritization is not as difficult as you would expect.
Then you definitely do it better than a lot of places. Because normally what I hear is everything, if I talk to teams and I say, are you working on more than one project today? And they always say yes. And I say, well, which one is top priority? And they say all of them. And that's obviously, there's no prioritization happening. And that to me is just a wish. You're going to hope they all finish, but they know they won't. If you don't do the right resource allocation and if you don't prioritize, then you're not going to be successful.
That's right.
So, okay, as a senior VP and CFO, you're also working and communicating with each of the groups and departments within ITT. So as a leader of cross-functional teams, which is, I think all projects should be cross-functional, what communication tactics do you utilize to ensure that your message is not only heard, but also understood across the organization? And for me, this is important because you are operating in 35 countries, I believe. So clearly you speak 4 languages, maybe not 35. So you have to, how do you make sure that your message is received in the way you intended and not mangled along the way? And I say that because the podcast opens with the quote from George Bernard Shaw: the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So how do you combat that?
Yeah, so there are several ways we do that. So there is the, let's say, institutional communication piece, where we have on a monthly basis, for instance, I'll have a 1 hour set with my entire finance team, making sure that they know how we're doing and how we're delivering, and what they need to focus on. And I'll keep 15 minutes at the end so they can ask questions. And that's the piece that I enjoyed the most, because it's really helpful for me to hear what they're worried about, and to be able to reinforce the message. We also have, on a quarterly basis with the entire enterprise, what we call town halls. We have a couple, so one for our Asia colleagues and one for our European and Americas colleagues. And so that helps really talk about all different subjects. I talk about finance, but also I mostly talk about business, to make sure that as a finance person, people feel that they are, they have a finance responsibility, but they need also to integrate into their thinking a business approach. And so making sure that you always balance those two is super important. So we have those institutional moments, and we try to have them very frequently, so that people, it's always top of mind for people. I think having also personal contacts with people is super, super important. So I would travel. I travel pretty often. I would say always on the road. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you I'm always on the road. And whether it is locally here in the US or internationally here in Europe or in Asia, I try to be present and to be physically present. And when I travel, I always go on the shop floor in order to understand how things are going. And again, here we start with what I discussed, SQDC. And then also I reserve some time to talk to have one-on-one with some people. Sometimes it's finance. I would say a large portion of the people that I talk to are finance people, but I also talk to young talents that are not necessarily working in finance, in order to understand their perspective. And I feel like, I'm glad if this is helping them, but I feel that I'm the one that gains the most, because I hear a completely different perspective that really help me make better decisions in my role and be more effective as a leader.
Well, I always appreciate people who are willing to meet face to face. I certainly enjoy the use of the technologies we have at our disposal today with all the electronics communications, but to me, there's no good substitute for eyeball to eyeball, face to face, having a conversation where you can read the other person's body language, see what they're thinking. And that just doesn't, I think, come across electronically. I interviewed Sherry Turkle from MIT, who's written 3 New York Times bestsellers. And she was talking to me and she goes, Clint, right now, we've done studies that show that people make a connection when they communicate, when eyeball to eyeball, there's something about eye to eye connections that actually form bonds between individuals. He goes, so right now I'm tricking you into thinking that I'm looking at you because I'm looking at my camera, but actually you're down here. So I don't see you at all. And that's just, it's hard to replicate that electronically. So I'm really happy to hear that I'm sure your wife wishes you would stay home more, but from a business perspective, I think it's phenomenal that you're willing to get out and travel and meet people face to face and have those conversations that are so important.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Emmanuel Caprais, Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at ITT Inc. Coming up in part two, Emmanuel discusses the importance of transparency and effective leadership.
Being transparent as a leader is so important because you tell people where you stand. And so they can decide right there and then if they want to trust you or if they don't. And then so as you get to exercise that transparency, every day you convince more and more people that it's worth actually collaborating with you. So transparency is super, super important.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.